Good morning, everyone. It's not yet exactly 9 o'clock, but I see everyone's ready, so I think we can start. Mr. Moy is ready as well.
Yes,
Good morning, sir.
good morning.
Madam President, just before we begin, I
Yeah.
wonder whether we might just have a very brief discussion. We've been in discussion with our friends on the other side about a few logistical matters concerning post-hearing briefs and the oral closings. I'm entirely in your hands as to whether you would like very briefly to discuss that now or whether you would prefer to discuss that later in the day.
Well, maybe you can address it now briefly, so we hear what you have to tell us, and then during the lunch break, for instance, we can discuss it within the tribunal and
Of course,
revert to you later. Yes, that makes sense.
of course. So, uh, Stephen, yeah.
Members of the tribunal, we recognize it's a bit early to be discussing this, given that we still have another day and a half of hearing time left, but we have reached agreement on, I think, all of the post-hearing matters, and we thought it may be beneficial for you guys, for the tribunal to have the benefit of our thinking before perhaps it starts discussing these matters itself. Number one, the parties have agreed not to do post-hearing briefs. That's principally for two reasons. One, it's very clear to, I think, everyone in the room that all three members of the tribunal are extremely on top of the file. And number two, I think both sides are trying to be cost sensitive. So for that reason, the parties have agreed not to do post-hearing briefs, subject, of course, to the tribunal's
But
views.
you don't have to explain this further because that would have been our proposal.
Okay,
as well.
excellent. Number two, that the parties do corrections to the transcripts within 30 days of receiving the last audio file, since the audio file, given all the translations, is important to the corrections to the transcript. Number three, that the parties have 30 days to mark quote unquote redactions to the video, if any, and consistent with the tribunal's procedural orders, the other side would have 30 days to respond to the comments from the first party on those issues. And finally, number four, that cost submissions be submitted within 30 days of that preceding event.
It's 90 days.
That's correct. The principal reason is to know the time charged for all of those activities. Some takes 30 days,
Yeah.
just giving the invoicing systems.
And that's agreed by the
That's
claimant.
agreed.
Yes.
Fine, so we'll discuss it was it the tribunal over lunch? I don't expect any particular difficulties, but let's discuss it and then revert to you. Thanks for having
Thank you.
done the work for us. Can I start with Dr. Boy now?
Yes, Madam President.
You're Simon Moy,
Yes, I am.
yes, from Rockflow Resources.
I was formerly at Rockflow.
Oh, yeah, we heard that you had changed firm. Can you specify what your new firm is?
Exodus.
Yeah, good, thank you. When did you change?
December 2022.
Three?
No. 2022.
Good. No, the reason I'm saying three is because I don't think it was signaled in your second report that is from 15 September 2023. But maybe I missed it.
Yes, I've been there over a year.
Good. You have provided us with two expert reports. The first one 30th December 2022 and the second one of the 15th of September 2023.
Yes.
You're heard as an expert. As an expert, you are under duty to make only statements in accordance with your sincere belief. Can you please read the expert declaration?
I solemnly declare upon my honor and conscience that my statement will be in accordance with my sincere belief.
Thank you. So we have received your presentation And you know that you have 15 minutes, and you know that 15 minutes is short.
Yes, thank you very much. May I start, Madam Mayor? Okay. Hello, Madam President and members of the tribunal. I'd like to first of all give a little bit of information about myself. My name is Simon Moy. I'm a reservoir engineer with 27 years upstream experience. I've been an integral part of subsurface teams responsible for onshore developments in Turkmenistan and offshore developments in Trinidad. I've been responsible for the classification and categorization of resources for 2 oil company IPOs, Barron Energy and Bayfield Energy. I've undertaken due diligence on projects worldwide in Africa, Asia, and Europe. I'm a member of the SPEE, the Society of Petroleum Evaluation Engineers. It's a society which promotes the high standards in resource and reservoir evaluations. I'd like to follow on briefly from my colleague, Mr. Atkinson's presentation, and make an important point. The GCOS, the geological chance of success, factors in the chance of discovery. It takes into account reservoir presence and quality, trap and seal, the presence of source rocks to generate oil and gas. All of these are present in the Slovakian license areas. And please bear in mind that 2 historical wells blew out due to the presence of oil and gas. So in this short presentation, I'm going to go through the key elements of my work and methodology, and there's 4 main elements: production profiles, benchmarking, development plans, and the development schedule. My starting point has been Mr. Howard's calculation of the P50 discovered volumes. This has been derived from a rigorous industry standard method to determine which of the prospects would be discovered following an exploration campaign. I've generated production profiles for each prospect based on sound reservoir engineering principles. Importantly, these calculations have used property values, such as for oil and reservoir permeability, etc., taken from Slovakian data. Benchmarking has been done for both gas and oil by comparison with Polish Carpathian examples, including the PGNiG data kindly supplied by Dr. Longman. High-level development schemes and schedules appropriate for the size and type of these discoveries is also presented. Excuse me. Problems here. I'm just trying to find presentation. Okay, I will do this one. So once prospects have been identified, I've calculated the production that would be expected once they've been developed. These depend on 3 interacting elements: reservoir, well, and surface, which are defined using material balance, IPR curves, and tubing curves. These interact via pressure, fluid properties, permeability, well configuration, and together they determine flow rates and ultimate recoveries. Each of these 3 elements are described in detail in my first and second reports. The methods I've used are industry standard. Of these 3, I'm going to focus on the material balance method and its applicability to the Slovakian prospects. So the material balance method is used across an extremely wide range of reservoir types for both oil and gas. It can be used for reservoirs under a range of drive mechanisms, including solution gas, gas cap, aquifer, and compaction drives, and it can be used in low permeability reservoirs. The left-hand example on the screen is taken from Dr. Longman's reports. That's an extreme example, and in fact represents 12 separate fields. In fact, material balance could be used on each of those separately. A more realistic configuration is the generic example on the right-hand side of the slide, which includes both sealing and non-sealing faults. The oil here, which is the shaded area, is in pressure equilibrium and has a single oil-water contact. Production causes the pressure to decline, and different fault blocks may show pressure declining at different rates. However, what's important is that using the correct averaging method, one can derive a representative average reservoir pressure, which can then be input into a material balance calculation. For the Slovakian prospects, the pressures calculated from the material balance method represent just such an average reservoir pressure. So, what is observed in the Polish Carpathian fields? So the Saranka report, exhibit AA11, contains a number of cross-sections showing oil distributions. Now, as can be seen in the above slide, in the cross-sections shown, despite extreme folding and possible internal faulting, continuous distributions of oil are apparent. These are shown as the dark areas in each, with a single oil-water contact, and a single depth. The presence and distribution of oil is confirmed through multiple penetrating wells. The oil distributions shown in the cross-sections indicate that they are in pressure equilibrium. Depletion resulting from production may result in a range of pressures across the wells and fault blocks, but a representative average reservoir pressure would still be definable. All of these examples could be analyzed using the material balance method. Oil discoveries in Slovakia would be similar in structure and would show similar distributions of oil. They too could be analyzed using the material balance method. So, turning to the issue of benchmarking, of the 8 developed prospects, 5 are gas. I undertook rigorous benchmarking of well and field performance against Polish Carpathian fields, including cumulative gas produced per well. Their data were supplied in my exhibits SM 51 to 54. As can be seen from the plots, the modelled gas prospects are comparable with the 2 Polish gas fields, which are highlighted. Average peak rates and cumulative volume per well cover similar ranges. And a description of these plots is given in my second report. Let's examine the oil benchmarking. Plot shows the historic volume of oil produced per field in the Polish Carpathians. Now, please bear in mind that this is the result of 150 years of oil exploration and development. Many of these fields were discovered through drilling of surface features and oil seeps. In fact, these are some of the oldest fields that I've ever looked at. A description of this plot is given in my second report. Now, looking at the right-hand side of the plot, i.e. fields having produced less than 500,000 barrels, these would be of a size too small to be identifiable from the available Slovakian seismic data, although it's likely that structures of this size may exist in Slovakia. Now, looking at the larger fields on the left-hand side of the plot, as can be seen, the Slovak oil prospects, which I've marked in yellow and purple, are of a size comparable with those Polish Carpathian fields. In addition, where data are available, recovery factors have been calculated, and one can see that these bracket the range I've calculated for the developed Slovakian oil prospects. In fact, Polish fields are slightly higher recoveries. Looking at the PGNiG data supplied by Dr. Longman, a simple verification process revealed that roughly 2,000 were inappropriate, mainly because the data indicated that they were drilled into stratigraphic intervals which were too deep. This QC process reduced the number of entries from about 4,000 to roughly 2,000. My demonstrative exhibit, CD8, graphically presents the depth and age distribution of these 2,000 entries. Plots shown on the screen at the moment have been taken from CD8. On the left-hand side, the PGNiG data from the Polish Carpathians, that's the top plot, is compared with historic production from the same region, bottom plot. and powerful insights can be obtained. The top plot shows depth versus date for each of the 2000 wells. The bottom plot shows the oil production with a rapid increase in gas production post 1945, and that's shown in red. What can be inferred? Well, most of the oil production, that's 87%, has come from the pre-1946 wells, and most of these are less than 1,000 meters. Gas production is from later, deeper wells. Now, taking those 977 pre-1946 wells and plotting their depths on the right-hand side shows that, in fact, 96% are less than 800 meters, and over half are less than 400 meters. These two depths are equivalent to my group 1B and 2B oil prospects shown in my second report in table 3.4. So a valid comparison of my productivity per well has to be between prospects in group 1B and 2B only. Other prospects in group 3B and 9B are deeper and will therefore have much higher pressures and would produce at a higher rate. So let's recap. There are 977 pre-1946 wells which produced 87% of the historic Carpathian oil production, and that's 71.5 million barrels. That works out at an average of 73,000 barrels per well. Now, considering that 90% of the wells were drilled before 1930, and that peak oil production occurred in 1910, that's from wells drilled at or before that date. Most of the production would have been from very shallow wells. A reasonable comparison could be made with my estimate of 143 to 220,000 barrels per well for Group 1B and Group 2B, taking into account that these wells would be drilled using modern drilling equipment and techniques, minimizing wellbore formation damage and maximizing production. With this understanding, ×2 and ×3 uplift over pre-1946 well performance is reasonable. So now let's move on to the development scheme. The table above on the screen at the moment is taken from my CD9 demonstrative exhibit. The first point to make that this is not a single development. This represents activity spread over 6 years, which results in the development of 3 oil discoveries and 5 gas discoveries. Secondly, please examine the depths of these wells. The vast majority are less than 820 meters. From my onshore experience, wells of this type can be drilled with a simple rig, completed and hooked up in less than 14 days. Please also look at the year 2021, the busiest year for drilling. Of the 45 wells required, 43 are less than 770 meters. From a drilling point of view, all of the above is doable. The majority of these prospects are shallow, they can be drilled quickly and developed using standard oil field equipment. I'd like to present a couple of European examples which illustrate that onshore oil fields similar to those described in my report currently being developed. The first example is the Anshof field in Austria. It's presented here as an example of a European onshore discovery which was rapidly developed and produced in short time frame, including the environmental permitting, using many of the techniques I have mentioned in my development scheme. If the tribunal is interested, there is a very nice online article in NS Energy. The associated gas production would still need to be exported or burnt for power, and although it's not clear from the article what the solution to this has been, the issue has clearly been resolved with little fuss and in short time frame. The second example is Romanian, from an online article in the Oil and Gas Journal. Again, a recent discovery made by OMV.
Dr. Moy, I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm told there is 1 minute left or 1 minute over. Yeah.
That's fine. I've got one more slide. Again, the recent discovery made by OMV of multiple fields. They are presented here as they are of a size which is comparable to the Slovak prospects. In fact, 2 are twice the size of the largest prospects. Clearly, onshore oil drilling and development is alive and well. So, in conclusion, I've used industry standards methodologies resulting in robust subsurface models and production profiles. I've shown the material balance method to be applicable to Polish fields and is appropriate for Slovakian discoveries. I've undertaken rigorous benchmarking for both oil and gas and have shown comparable performance between Polish fields and Slovakian discoveries. And my development scheme and timescales reflect those observed in other onshore European developments and also reflect personal experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I give the floor to Mr. Pilawa?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Dr. Moy.
Good morning.
I'm Douglas Plow, and I'll be asking you a few questions today. If we can keep this presentation up for just a moment, and if you can go back a slide. Dr. Moy, was this information in either one of your expert reports?
No, it wasn't.
I don't need the presentation up anymore.
And what about the article that you mentioned? I didn't note the name. Is that referenced in any of your reports?
No, they're not.
Very good. Thank you. I didn't remember it.
Can you tell me your familiarity with the Slovak oil and gas regulatory framework?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Generally speaking, are you aware of the types of permits or other authorizations that an oil and gas company needs to secure for exploration or a development project in Slovakia?
If it were specific to Slovakia, no, but the generalities and general regulations, yes, they're probably very similar, but I'm not familiar with the details of regulations in Slovakia.
And I think generally, excuse me, generally speaking, one of these, I think you might be familiar with, but you're generally familiar with an EIA, an environmental impact assessment.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Are you aware that in Slovakia, for any oil or gas producing well, a preliminary EIA is required?
Yes, I've heard that, yes.
Okay. As part of your preparation for your expert reports, did you undertake any geographical analysis of the 1,200 square kilometers of the license areas?
I'm not quite sure that I understand your question.
Okay. Did you study the terrain at all?
Only from what I've seen from maps.
Okay. If we could start at paragraph 8 and 9 of your first expert report. This is on page 5. Yeah. You have it in front of you.
Sorry,
Okay, I
yes,
wasn't sure if you were looking at the screen or if you.
No, I'm
Okay.
I'm ready. Sorry
right.
about that.
And so just to follow on and to understand where your expert report lies in the 3,
Mhm.
in paragraph 8, you state that the first question you were asked to address was to identify the likely volume of hydrocarbons which hypothetically could be produced from the prospects in the license areas should they contain hydrocarbons.
That's
And
correct. Yeah.
thank you. And I understand really what you're trying to do here is Mr. Atkinson has developed his PIIP estimations, which is amounts of oil and gas that might be in the ground.
It might be, yes.
And so your analysis is if there actually is oil or gas, then you're calculating the amount that might be produced from those amounts.
It's the whole process is we have a selection of structures that have been mapped. And we have a selection of their relative in-place volumes. And the statistical process that's gone through allows a P50 discoverable volume to be estimated. So that is, if you were to go out and drill that license area in the way that's been described, what is the P50 chance of what volume would you get from that process? And so, and also what selection of prospects are you likely to find that are filled with hydrocarbons, either oil or gas? That process is described also in one of the papers that I present in my second report.
But really what I'm trying to, or what I'm wrestling with, what I am wrestling with is that this is the uncertainty in this analysis.
That's dealt with through the statistical process that we've undertaken, which is rigorous to give you it is an estimate, P50, of the likely volumes you're going to discover if you undertook a drilling campaign.
The likely volumes that you will discover if there is oil or gas at each one of these prospects, right?
There won't be oil and gas at each one because you're drilling the 40 prospects, but it's telling you what you're likely to discover if you were to drill those 40 exploration wells on those 40 structures that Mr. Atkinson has identified from the seismic.
And if we can go down to your next paragraph. Separately, for both oil and gas, you were asked to generate representative, most likely production profiles for the prospects in the license areas and outline a feasible development scheme.
Yes.
Correct. And that development scheme assumes that exploration drilling occurs in the first instance, right?
Well, you'd have to discover, yes, oil and gas first through drilling.
And your model assumes that Discovery Global would drill an exploration well at all 40 prospects that Mr. Atkinson identified, right?
That's over 2 years.
Yes. And I understand that the way that the three reports interact with one another is that Mr. Howard's decision tree modeling produced successful oil and gas prospects. Is that fair?
Not quite. So the decision tree analysis gives you an estimate based on, first of all, you've got each of the in-place volumes for each of the mapped prospects, each of which may or may not contain hydrocarbons. You then have a geological chance of success. Both of those have been estimated by Mr. Atkinson. The decision tree process is a robust statistical method that you then run through to allow you to estimate P50 likely discoverable volume should you drill all 40 of those. And then from that volume, that P50 volume, and that was calculated for all four of the trends, the geological trends, you have a series of scenarios which represent the successful prospects that would contain that P50 volume. So there's selection for the two gas trends, and there's a selection of prospects, the two oil trends, and that's given us the 8 prospects which we've identified that would be either filled with oil or with gas.
So I was just trying to ultimately get to the oil and gas prospects that you actually create a development plan for. And so just,
Yes, sure.
yeah, just to come back to that, after this 40, this campaign of drilling 40 wells, the end product are oil, gas, or oil prospects and gas prospects, right?
Yes, a list of 8 that are considered would be successful, statistically determined, out of the drilling of all 40.
And those 8 are the ones that you use to create your development plan, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And I understand that the development scheme for those 8, that's made on a but-for basis.
Yes, so it's assuming, yes, exactly.
And to understand that but-for basis, it's but for alleged actions of Slovakia, this development scheme is what would likely have occurred.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you're aware that the extent of Discovery's drilling program was to drill 3 exploration wells, one at Smilno, Kriva Olka, and Ruska Paruba, right?
Yes,
And I believe that Mr. Atkinson confirmed yesterday that there is a very low chance of an actual accumulation of oil or gas at Ruska Paruba. Do you recall that?
I vaguely recall that.
Okay. And I understand that the development scheme that you've generated, the end product is one large integrated development plan. Is that a fair characterization?
No, it's not.
Well, maybe this will help. What I'm trying to understand is, for example, at Smilno, the Smilno prospect, your development plan does not say, here's the Smilno prospect. If Discovery would have drilled here and found oil, here's the specific development plan that future production from Smilno would look like, but only at Smilno.
I believe Smilno is gas. And the reason that
Oh, sorry, you're right, yeah.
gas and oil have been treated differently. So there are the 3 successful oil prospects. Each of those is developed separately in terms of the sequence. The gas prospects, those where gas discoveries occurred, had to be developed or would be developed as a whole because of the amount of gas that's in them. You would need to ensure you had sufficient time to construct the export line. And that's again described in my second report. And that's why the 2 are treated slightly differently.
Thank you. I understand that they're treated differently, but there's no just standalone Smilno development plan, right?
No,
Okay. And beyond these initial 3 wells, we don't actually know what Discovery was planning to do we?
I'm not aware of what their ultimate plans would have been.
And so beyond these first 3 wells, the development plan that you were asked to generate is a hypothetical plan.
It's a but-for case.
It's not based on any fulsome drilling program. Is that fair?
It's we took into account when we did the statistical approach of a drilling campaign with a 5-well walkaway.
Dr. Moy, I'm actually just looking for the there's no document, for example, that's
No.
a drilling program that you used.
No, there isn't.
Okay. And I want to come back to the Smilno prospect, the gas prospect that we were just talking about. So if we could open up to page 29 of your first expert report, and this is paragraph 115.
Okay. I have it.
Okay, great. So this is the Smilno gas prospect. And you explain here in paragraph 115 that Discovery envisaged a new 15-kilometer pipeline from the original well or any subsequent development well at Smilno. And that pipeline would ultimately lead into the Slovakian gas system. Is that fair?
Yes, based on what I had seen of
Yes.
those documents, yes.
Yes. And we're going to pull one of those up. So if we can pull up SM 019, this is the document that you cite in that paragraph called the Smilno feasibility study. It'll come up on one of the screens in just a moment. Are you familiar with it? Take as much time as you need.
Thank you. Yes, yeah.
And if we can scroll down to the last paragraph on this page. Thank you very much. And if we can see in this last paragraph, that very first sentence kind of discusses this pipeline in a little more detail and, excuse me, the part of the route or the potential route it could take, saying that distance of extraction network to gas pipeline 9,000. Real terrain is complicated, hills, forests, brooks, therefore proposed track of connection pipeline, et cetera. Do you recall that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, yeah.
And if we could go to the fourth page to get an image as to what this path might have looked like. There we go. Thank you very much. And just to orient everyone who might not have seen this document, that bottom yellow line, that's the Slovakian pipeline system, right?
I believe, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the red dotted line is a potential route that this pipeline could have taken.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you didn't undertake an analysis about the feasibility of building this specific pipeline, right?
That's correct, I did.
And as far as you're aware, AOG or Discovery Global didn't have any draft agreements in place to use it or any permits necessary for this pipeline?
I'm not aware of any.
And this pipeline, this scenario, it's not reflected in your ultimate development plan. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Because of the volume of gas.
Well, yeah, we'll come to that volume of gas, but just this standalone possibility is not reflected in the development program.
Yeah, this is for one well.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of how Discovery Global was planning to finance its well drilling program?
I'm not aware of the details, no.
Okay. I want to walk through,
I'm just curious on that point. Thank you. It'll help me later on and probably shorten things. Have you read Discovery submissions in this case?
Some parts.
Okay, I'll be more specific. I'm not being, it's not surprising. Have you read the evidence, the witness statements regarding how they intended to fund their ongoing developments?
I read through them, but it was a while back,
Understood.
so I can't really, I'm not in them.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
thank you. I actually want to walk through with you, Dr. Moy, if we can, what it would look like to just develop this one scenario. And what I mean by that is, let's say we go to Smilno, we find gas there,
Mhm.
and we ultimately want to bring that gas into production. So I'm going to walk through a series of steps that I think would need to be undertaken, and let me know if this is generally the right idea. Does that sound okay?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. So first and foremost, if revenues wanted to be generated from this, gas would need to be discovered.
Yes,
It would need to be in sufficient quantities to justify development, right?
yes,
And if the gas quantities justify development, the exploration well would need to be turned into a development well, or an additional well might need to be drilled that would become a development well.
yes, either of those.
Yes. Okay, great. And under Slovak law, as we discussed earlier, any development well must undergo a preliminary EIA. Are you comfortable accepting that point?
Yes, I understand that that needs to be done.
And of course, that preliminary EIA could turn into a more fulsome assessment, which we've been calling a full EIA.
What are I don't know what the triggers would be for that.
Okay. And while all of this is going on, maybe simultaneously, AOG would have to begin construction of this pipeline, right?
It would need to be started, yes.
It would have it would need to have the right to use the land that the pipeline is on, right?
Certainly.
It would then need to enter into some form of an agreement with the Slovakian distribution network to connect to the Slovakian
Yes.
the Slovakian distribution system. Right?
Yes, correct.
And there would be additional infrastructure that's required, such as a processing facility of some sort to separate the gas from other fluids, right?
Yeah, pretty minimal though.
Minimal, I accept that, but there would need to be some form of a facility to conduct that separation,
That
right?
would probably be near the wellhead.
Okay. And so that infrastructure would obviously need to be created.
You just phone up and order it.
I'm sorry?
You would phone up and order it. It's off the shelf.
Right. And once all of that is done, the pipeline is built, it's connected,
Mhm.
then AOG could have started generating revenues.
I presume so, yes.
Okay. And of course, if it can't build that pipeline, it can't produce gas from this site, right?
There might be, and there are other options. So for example, the gas could be used for gas to power. Obviously, you're then generating power. You need to export route. That's a scheme that isn't described in my report, but that's commonly done as well when it's difficult to get a export pipeline out from a site, for example.
What does that process look like?
Usually you have a gas to power generator. So gas will go in, get dehydrated at the wellhead. It then goes to a gas engine that will burn the gas and generate electrical power, which obviously then has to be hooked up to the national grid.
But as far as you're aware, that was not AOG's plan for this site, right?
Clearly not. No, not in this case, but it's an option for any operator.
And is it fair to say that while Kriva Olka is an oil prospect, these are generally, and I'm happy for you to walk me through them, but these are generally the same steps. Of course, no need for a pipeline to connect to the Slovakian distribution system, but these are the same general steps to bring that well into production.
Yeah, I mean, for oil, you would not have the pipeline, obviously.
But you would have a pipeline for associated gas.
Yes, or you could also burn it, which apparently is what some operators are doing in the UK, for example.
Do you think that AOG would have, are you talking about gas flaring?
No,
Okay.
again, the gas, sorry,
Okay.
the gas is burnt to generate power. And then you don't need to use a pipeline to get rid of the associated.
But your but-for model provides, or it anticipates AOG taking that associated gas and selling it into the Slovakian distribution system.
Yes, in my scenario, yes.
Okay. So if AOG could not have done that, well, let me say this, your but-for model depends, that scenario depends upon AOG constructing a pipeline for the associated gas and connecting to the Slovakian distribution system.
What's described, yes, requires a pipeline for associated gas.
If we could go back to, we made a reference to this earlier, the successful gas prospects, that project. And we can take these images down, and if we could pull up respondents demonstrative number 2, it should be RD2 or RD002. Great, thank you so much. We're also going to be going back to parts of your expert report, and if you need both on the screen, just want to make sure that we're oriented, so just let me know.
Thank you.
I'm sure that you've seen this image before, right?
I have, yeah.
Okay. And generally speaking, do you accept that this represents somewhat what your final development model will look like?
Yes, in general.
Okay.
Yes, it's an amalgam of various sources.
Exactly. But you're okay with this image, right?
Yes, it's
Okay.
fine.
And now we're going to start looking at your expert report at the same time. If it's possible to keep this up here and ideally still see some of the details of it, we're going to try that. So if we could also pull up Dr. Moy's first expert report, specifically page 53, paragraph 207. Uh, 53. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, in paragraph 207, you made reference to this earlier. This is talking about the gas developments. And can you please read the sentence for the record that begins with plateau gas rates kind of towards the end and extends onto the next page?
Okay, yeah, sure. plateau gas rates will be too high to transport within the existing SPP domestic gas network. Therefore, produced gas will be fed into a new Poland-Slovakian interconnector via a centrally located hub somewhere around BMO3, and that's to a 75-kilometer, 500-millimeter diameter pipeline. At the far end, it will be compressed at 80 bar and fed into the Poland-Slovakian interconnector.
Thank you, Dr. Moy. And for illustration purposes, I know that the parties have estimated this to be 55 kilometers or 75 kilometers, but it's somewhere around 55 to 75 kilometers, right?
I would say yes.
Okay. And that's that red line on the development model. You can see that, right?
I believe so. I mean, that's not my red line. The point on the right-hand side, I believe, is close to where the Poland-Slovakia interconnector enters Slovakia. So it would connect at some point along its length.
Fair enough. And the reason it has to take this route is because the gas prospects produce an amount or plateau gas rates that are too high for the domestic pipeline system.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the case because
Right.
the capacities are too small.
Okay. So in the but-for model, the development scheme that you've put forward, the 5 gas prospects like this can only succeed if that pipeline is built, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now for the other prospects or the successful ones, we're going to move to the oil fields.
Mhm.
And there are 3 of them, right?
Yes.
And I think we talked about earlier that all 3 of those oil fields anticipate associated gas being dealt with
Mhm.
by being pumped back into the Slovakian distribution system, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And actually, Mr. Howard's DCF monetizes that amount. The idea is that those are sold.
Yeah.
Right, those amounts of gas.
Small component. Yes.
Yes. So in the but-for model, I guess, the development scheme here for those oil prospects, that scheme to work. I'm sorry, that plan to work. Those pipelines would need to be constructed as well, right?
As described in my second report, the associated gas is disposed and sold via pipeline. But as I said, there are current examples where operators burn its gas to power. So that would be an option. It's not described as such in my report, that second option.
Yeah, your model is the one where it's fed back into the Slovakian distribution system.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
You say it's not described as such. I know you mentioned it's not modeled. Is that
That's
the point?
correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if we look at the model just in its entirety, this development plan contains 99 producing wells, right?
It's a series of different field developments, a total of 99, I believe, development wells. 33 are oil and 66 are gas.
99 wells. And there's also a central gas processing facility that would need to be built, right?
Yes, that would collect the gas from the gas wells.
Okay. And the model anticipates the pipelines for the associated gas that we just discussed, right?
Yeah, they're not marked here, that they would be from those oil fields that are at the bottom right-hand side.
And at no point does the model ever consider that Discovery fails to obtain all of the permits or authorizations required for the project, right?
That's correct.
We could go to your second report, and specifically page 36. This is figure 5.1.
Yes, I have it.
Oh, I'm sorry. This should be page 36. Thank you, thank you. And maybe we can make this a little easier on the eyes. We can remove the development plan and just focus on the report, right? We can blow that up a little bit. Awesome. Thank you. So this is the schedule that you have proposed for the exploration and development plan, right?
That's correct.
And if we start at the top, this is the exploration phase, right?
The top line, yes.
Exactly, that blue line that says 20 and 20.
Mhm.
And this is 40 exploration drills over the course of 2017 and 18, right?
That's correct.
And it also includes site preparation, right? It's not just drilling.
Yep.
Okay. And this all takes place within the course of 2 years, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't account for any material delays that might occur within that time frame.
Well, you should be able to drill 40 wells in 2 years, taking into account the time required for site prep, getting your kit and getting out there and drilling those wells. Please bear in mind that those 40 wells, half of them are less than 1,000 meters. So you can do that with a small rig on the back of a truck.
I understand that, but I'm just talking more about kind of the operational issues that one can experience in any type of project like this. The model, even if there are material delays or even if there are issues, for example, constructing some sites, there are a whole host of issues that could arise. That's uncontroversial, right?
There could be.
There could be. But in your model, all of that, even if there are major operational delays, 40 wells are still drilled by the end of 2018, right?
I've assumed.
Can I just ask for a clarification? If I read this correctly, you have not counted time for the preliminary EIA.
That's not in there, I don't
That's
believe.
not in there. Thank you. Apologies.
No problem at all. So you were instructed to assume that drilling would commence on 1 January 2017, correct?
Yes.
Am I correct in my understanding that as part of that instruction, you were also instructed to assume that Discovery already had access rights to each of these 40 well locations?
I assume that would be sorted out as part of the process of site preparation and drilling.
Okay, let me see if I just understand. I'm just going to read the transcripts. One moment. Sort of. Okay.
Are you counting the access rights, securing the access rights as part of the site preparation within the 2 years, or do you assume it's done before?
Well, some of these will be ongoing because you've got 2 years to do the ones, the last 20 will be in the second year. So you've got a whole year to do that. And I have simply presumed that there'll be some small amount of preparatory work prior to the drilling of the first well.
So 2017 and 2018 are devoted to drilling 40 exploration wells, preparing the sites, and securing access to all of these locations, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of Discovery Global ever undertaking a project like this before?
I'm aware that Mike has a lot of experience drilling wells. And I'm aware that they had AFEs for 3 wells, which for whatever reason they weren't able to drill. That is the extent of my knowledge.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the Petroleum Resource Management System, what we'll just call PRMS to make it a lot easier. Now, you mentioned it in the presentation, and I'm thankful for that. Would you agree with me that the PRMS represents industry guidelines?
Yes, certainly.
and oil and gas companies are both familiar with and utilize PRMS?
Yes, they do.
And financial institutions understand what the PRMS is?
One would hope so, yes.
I was hoping that would be non-controversial. You have extensive experience with PRMS, right?
Yes, I do.
And you understand the reserve and resource classification under the PRMS.
That's
right?
correct.
And the classification of reserves is an important step in a hydrocarbons project, right?
It is, yeah.
It signifies that the project has reached a stage where it can be considered commercially viable, right?
If one is in the situation where you've got reserves, yes.
Thank you. And that reserves classification often helps secure financing for a project, right?
Yes, it would.
And generally speaking, that reserves classification is made in some form of an independent report, like a competent person's report, right?
Yes, usually.
I'm just going to abbreviate that as CPR from here on out, competent person's report. Thanks.
And for the benefit of the tribunal, I'd like to point out that there is value in prospective and contingent resources as well, not just in reserves.
It's fairly common for CPRs to utilize the PRMS guidelines, right?
Yes, it is.
In talking about reserves, they must be discovered, recoverable, commercial, and remaining, right?
That's correct.
And all four of those must be satisfied for a reserves classification, right?
Yes.
It would be contrary to the PRMS guidelines to make a reserves declaration if one of those criteria is not met, right?
Usually, yes. When you're looking at the situation here, we have a but-for situation.
Dr. Moy, I'm not talking about this situation. I'm just talking about the PRMS guidelines in general.
That's correct, yes.
So if one of those, I'm sorry, it would be contrary under the PRMS guidelines to make a reserves classification if one of those criteria is not met.
Yeah, could you repeat those for me,
Sure.
please?
Do you want to open up the PRMS?
No, just,
Okay, discovered,
yeah.
recoverable,
Mhm.
commercial,
Mhm.
and remaining. You need all four of those, right?
Yeah.
And discovered means that drilling has taken place and confirmed the existence of hydrocarbons, right?
That's correct.
So it would be contrary to the PRMS guidelines to make a reserves classification if the hydrocarbons are undiscovered, right?
Yes, usually, yes.
And so your expert reports, which make a reserves classification, even though discoveries hydrocarbons are undiscovered, that does not conform to the PRMS guidelines, does it?
We're talking about the but-for situation.
But I'm not talking about the but-for situation. I'm talking specifically about PRMS and those requirements. And
Well-
so the question is, your expert reports, which make a reserves classification, even though the hydrocarbons are undiscovered, that does not conform to the PRMS, does it?
It will do in the but-for case. There is a difference.
Yeah, maybe can I ask for a clarification? I did not understand how in the but for you convert, if I can say, resources into reserves, but the state of the evidence that we have is still the resource
Sure.
state.
May I explain?
Yes, please.
Okay, so in the so the license areas contain prospective resources as mapped. They haven't been drilled yet. There's the process, the decision tree, the incorporation of the geological chance of success gives one an estimate of if you went out with your drilling rigs and you drilled up those 40 prospects, it would give you an estimate of what your 50-50 chance of discoverable volumes are. And those prospects that would be filled with gas and oil. At that point, they would be considered and classified as contingent resources. So the difference between contingent resources and moving on to reserves is down to 7 commercial criteria. And that includes the finance, all the, the environmental, the paperwork and just development plans. So when I describe the volumes that would be produced as reserves, it's in a but-for case, assuming that those commercial criteria would be met following the successful discovery.
But how do you assume, on what basis, on what data do you accept that the commerciality requirements would be met?
Because, first of all, it's done elsewhere. It's not an unusual development. It's not of a size that's unreasonable. All of those 7 elements, the development plan, the export route, they're all doable. They're all feasible. They're all reasonable. I haven't seen anything in what needed to be done that one would suggest is unattainable, unreasonable. So in a but-for case, knowing the will of discovery, they, having made a discovery, they would actually want to develop it. I can't see any barriers that would stop any of those 7 commercial criteria from being met.
Provided they make the discovery, which you account for by the probability, is that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies for the interruption.
That's fine, Madam President. I'm going to go to that list of 7 criteria for commerciality. Okay, I'd like to put 2 documents on the screen. Okay, we're now moving into the but-for scenario and the evidence that you've presented as justifying the classification for reserves. Just before I do that, are you aware of any competent persons report that has made a reserves declaration assuming that commerciality is met?
Sorry, say that again.
Are you aware of any competent persons report that makes a reserves declaration by assuming commerciality?
Not a competent person's report, no, because it's not used for that purpose.
Because it's not in line with PRMS?
No, it doesn't deal with a but-for situation.
The competent persons report doesn't deal with a but-for situation.
No, it wouldn't.
It wouldn't. So it's unlikely that you would qualify for reserves-based lending, for example, with a competent persons report that operates on a but-for scenario, because that's not common, right?
Usually the competent person's report is a description of what's there at the moment.
And what we have at the moment here are undiscovered hydrocarbons, right?
That's correct, in the prospective area.
We can pull up Dr. Moy's first expert report. And we are going to go, excuse me, just give me one moment. We go to page 57 of his first expert report. And at the same time, can we please pull up exhibit AA037? And specifically, this is PRMS.
Correct.
And specifically, if we can go to page 11 of the PDF itself. Okay, so down at the bottom is where we start the discussion of the determination of commerciality and the 7 criteria that must be met. You see that, right?
Correct, yes.
We're going to look at this in your expert report at the same time, because I think there's, excuse me, a little bit difference in language, but just want to be clear here.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first commerciality requirement in your report says a technically mature development plan. Under PRMS says there must be evidence of a technically mature feasible development plan. And the only evidence of a development plan here is the one that you created, right?
That's my development plan, yes.
Would you consider your development plan technically mature?
Not at this stage, no.
Let's move to financing, the second one. Paragraph 224.2 of your first expert report, and here, letter B, under determination of commerciality. There must be evidence of financial appropriations either being in place or having a high likelihood
Mhm.
of being secured to implement the project. And in your report, the only evidence you have provided is your opinion that it's highly likely that funding would be available. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if we go down to G, in particular on AA 37, so if we go down the next page. And we will have to also go down one page in Dr. Moy's report. Paragraph 224.7. This requirement says that there must be evidence